I'm still working on the NPCs that populate the procedural city of my exploration game. In one of my previous devlogs, I have outlined the systems that allow me to generate over 1 million persistent characters, each with unique name, appearance, and a schedule to move around the city. I am now at the stage of refining their behaviors, and that's what I've been doing since my last update. And although I'm not quite finished yet, and I don't have any big new features to show off, I thought I'd share my progress anyway. And as usual, a big thanks to my patrons on Patreon for supporting my project. If you'd like to join them, check out the link in the description. But first, a brief overview in case you haven't watched the previous devlog on the subject, or maybe forgot what it was about. The NPC schedules are simulated on the GPU and stored in a render target, which allows me to simulate the whole population in real time without a noticeable performance impact. Then, this render target is read and filtered by proximity to the player in a CPU thread, so only the NPCs that are currently in range are spawned in the game world. Now, here's where things get tricky. Once an NPC is spawned in the game, it needs to synchronize its position with the GPU simulation, to make sure it doesn't pop in and out of existence randomly, since the render target is treated as the source of truth on each character's whereabouts. This is why every NPC receives an anchor position from the render target that it tries to stay close to. Because the GPU simulation is rough, these anchor positions can move through the city without any regard to its layout. So it's my job to implement the NPC behavior that follows them no matter what. After all, if an NPC fails to follow its anchor, its position will be inconsistent. For this purpose, I have to use several different systems. First of all, I have to separate the NPCs and their behaviors by their schedule phase. Right now, there are two types: static ones that are currently at work or at home, and dynamic ones that are in transit between the two. I will be adding more phases and more complexity once I get these simple schedules working, but not just yet. Let's start with the dynamic NPCs that are traveling from one location to another. Their anchors update their positions every few seconds, and the NPC AI has to keep up with it. In order to do that, I'm using Unreal Engine's NavMesh system with dynamic invokers and a behavior tree that performs different actions depending on where the anchor is relative to the character. First of all, the anchor's location gets projected onto a street graph that maps out preferred walkable paths to make sure that it's always in a walkable location, and the NPC follows that location and not the original anchor position, which is shown by the green sphere right here. Then the algorithm is the following. If the anchor is very close, don't go anywhere and wait. If the anchor is a bit further away, then we use the standard move command to get as close to it as possible. And if the anchor is even further away, the NPC will attempt to construct a path to it using the street graph, as it is more efficient for longer distances than the NavMesh. And if all of the above actions fail, for example if neither a NavMesh nor a street graph path can be found, we find a location that is somewhat close to the direction we're going and follow that. By the way, I'm fairly new to Unreal Engine's AI system, and I'm figuring it out as I go, so if my behavior tree doesn't look right, let me know. There are a few more challenges on top of that. For example, my NPCs in transit would constantly get lost inside the buildings, so I had to add a special navigation modifier to mark indoor areas and exclude them from the transit behavior, to make sure those characters wouldn't ever enter buildings. Luckily, it was fairly easy to do with the NavMesh modifier system. Also, due to the verticality of the game world, I've had to use two dynamic NavMesh volumes to mark navigable areas. One is always at the street level to make sure that the NPCs in the streets can walk, and another one moves with the player, so that the NavMesh is only generated at street level and at player's level, but not in between, because generating a NavMesh for every single floor of a tall building would be very inefficient. Now let's talk about the static NPCs that are at work or at home. As I've mentioned in my previous video on the topic, these locations are generated on the GPU, taking into account the population density of each area. But they are not precise either. A static anchor location may not fall inside a building. In fact, most of the time they don't. So the NPC AI has to fill this gap and find the nearest building to put that NPC in. In order to do this, I have to pull information about the nearby buildings from the global topology object, as well as the city blocks that are currently spawned in the game world, to make sure the building actually exists. Then, once the NPC picks a building to use as its static location, it will select an interior within it. An NPC at home will try to pick a residential interior type, an apartment, or a hotel, and the ones at work will pick any non-residential interiors. However, not every building has residential or non-residential interiors, so right now they pick randomly if they can't find the interior of the correct type. But this is something I will be improving shortly and make them pick another building instead. And also add extra conditions to my interior generator that make sure a given block will always have at least one residential and one non-residential interior. Another thing I am working on right now is the transition between the dynamic and the static phases, so that if you follow an NPC in transit and they reach their destination, they will walk to the correct building for their static location, go to the elevator if their target interior is above ground floor, and only then teleport to the correct level. I don't think I will implement the whole elevator ride animation for them, or at least not at this point. I think simply teleporting and maybe playing some sort of an animation would be enough. And vice versa, if an NPC at home or at work decides it's time to leave, they will approach the elevator, teleport to ground floor, and walk outside the building to get on their way. Now, because these static locations are picked only when the player is near, it is impossible to tell where a particular NPC's home or work location will be if they and the player aren't currently there. This is a problem I still have to solve because it would be nice to know in advance where a particular character's home may be for gameplay reasons. Another small set of improvements I made are minor performance optimizations. I've staggered NPC updates after reading them from the render target to make sure no more than a handful of them get updated in the same frame. I've also noticed that the character movement tick is eating up a lot of resources, so I added some code that varies the tick interval by distance to the player. Characters that are further away will tick more rarely. This effect may be exaggerated right now, but I will fine-tune the values to make sure it's not as noticeable. And I'm still not done with the performance either. There are still issues linked to the NPCs that I'm looking to solve right now. Oh, and one more small improvement I'd like to mention is the outfit colors for the characters. You may notice that the crowd looks different from the one in my previous videos. Back then, I generated the NPC outfit colors completely randomly, which led to very colorful results that just don't look like something people would actually wear. So instead of rolling the color as a uniform random variable, I implemented a compound normal distribution for the hue, with peaks around brown and blue tones, and also normal distributions for the saturation and value, with their peaks shifted towards the lower ends of those parameters. This creates a much more realistic looking crowd. So that's about it as far as progress goes. I'm having to learn a lot of new stuff when it comes to character AI and navigation as I go, so it's going a bit slower than I'd like. And there are also more improvements I want to make, like making the schedules more complex and adding more phases, such as leisure time, and of course adding animations for sitting down or interacting with objects in the game world. Alright, that's it. Stay creative.